Are you all awake? Very good. So happy to have you guys here today. We've got a fantastic panel, and I hope you can hear me. We've got a fantastic panel to talk about continuous learning today. And I am so delighted. Ben was kind enough to introduce me. What I'm going to do is have each of our speakers, our panelists, introduce themselves. And I think you'll agree that they are just more than up to the task of dealing with this particular session. So we'll go ahead here with Corey.
Fantastic. Good morning. I'm Corey Criswell. I'm Chief Leadership Officer Americas for Adeption. We're a global leadership development consultancy.
Natalie Canadeo. I'm the VP of Human Resources at Epicor Software. I currently lead our North America, or America's HR Business Partner team, global HR operations, and what else? Strategic projects, sorry. But over my course, I've led L&D, employee experience, internal comms, and HR tech, so a variety of areas.
Hi, I'm Peter Grimm. I'm AVP of Training Development and Design for Sedgwick, Third-Party Insurance Administration, and that is the division I'm in. And so I lead our teams that train new colleagues, development of new training, development of existing training, just basically all the different aspects of training for our organization.
Good morning, everyone. Tsai. I'm with Thrivent. I'm the head of talent. Prior to that, I was also the chief learning officer at Ecolab. I grew up in the learning space, so when I was invited to talk about learning and learning culture, of course, I was very delighted to be part of this conversation and really looking forward to this.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, why don't we jump in and get started? Our first topic is actually dealing with reskilling and with upskilling talent. I think most business leaders agree that every employee deserves the opportunity to thrive. But most would argue also that creating a culture of continuous learning is critical for an organization. But knowing how to nurture that talent or where to begin with a training program is a little bit daunting. And so I'm hoping that our panelists will help us break it down. I'm hoping that you can talk and share with us a few tips, maybe some experiences that you've had, and talk about how do you reskill or upskill talent within your organizations. And if it's okay, I'm going to start with Natalie, just for this first one.
All right. So we actually started with redefining our values. So much like Becca just spoke about, we had some pretty generic values, and so we wanted to make them unique to Epicor and our culture. We looked at our engagement survey, did interviews with employees across the board, and came up with the values and what it means to be part of Team Epicor. And with that, it was a little aspirational, a little striving, but it gave a language for us to talk about what it means to be part of the company and where we're headed. And then it was easier as we started to implement an online learning library of courses to then chart those paths. And then similarly, as we looked next into defining competencies or skills at the leadership level and at the functional level, we could really make sure they aligned to who we are at the core, and then evaluate where do we need to upskill, where do we need to employ those learning resources appropriately. So that's where we started, but I'm sure everybody has some other tips as well.
As we were waiting in the back, I heard Becca commenting on investing in leadership development, and we have the same philosophy that we do believe that transformation and growth really begins with every leader who can recruit talent that has a growth mindset and cultivate a learning culture in their own teams. So for that purposes, we've really invested significantly in leadership development at all levels of the organization. At Thrivent, some of my colleagues are here. So for our frontline employees, we have a program for aspiring leaders. We specifically call that Leading with Purpose, so that we help all team members really understand their personal values and how they align with our company values, so that they're inspired with a sense of energy and purpose and focus on how to increase their own impact for the work around them and those colleagues that they work with. And then for all of our people leaders, we have a bespoke program. We call that Leading High Performance because we hold every leader accountable for building an effective team that can deliver great results. So we address fundamental skills of managerial and leadership, and we're permeating that throughout the organization so that every leader is empowered with a common set of skills around, basic things like how to communicate, how to delegate work, how to create psychological safety, how to delegate and align work, and so on. And then for our mid-level leaders, we have what we call an enterprise, next generation enterprise leaders, really building this foundation of our directors or managers of managers who are learning company strategy and significant business models from robust academic programming so that they can understand their role in aligning corporate strategy to their team's day-to-day work, as well as learning how to navigate the enterprise as they lead teams across matrix organizations, across different functions, so that they learn to think as an enterprise leader. And then we have very specific targeted executive development programming that's more targeted towards strategic thinking and enterprise impact, is particularly in the moment of transformation. So that's just on the leadership muscle building side. For our organization. And then to your point earlier about building resources to all of the workforce, we offer ongoing courses as well as self-directed learning resources. So we do subscribe to LinkedIn Learning, we subscribe to Get Abstract. So all of these rich and robust resources are available for team members to really tap into their own interest or job-specific skills. And we want to, make it possible for people to pursue ongoing development, even if it's just day by day, bite-sized learning without the barriers of approvals and cost charges and things like that, so that we want self-directed learning to occur with minimal friction.
Did you want to answer,
Sure.
Corey? Sure.
Yes. I love what you've both shared, both in terms of the richness of the curriculum and in the connection back to leadership competencies. One of the struggles that we're hearing from organizations is how expensive it is to continually upskill, reskill, and our HR teams tend to be smaller these days, and it seems as if just when we've developed the content, the approach to upskill, reskill, now the businesses are asking for new skills, different skills. And so the one ad I'd have is teaching people how to learn, because learning agility, we're finding, is the skill that people most need, and putting that ability in their own hands. How can I take charge of my own development in addition to formal development by the organization is something that we're finding at Adeption is leading to really impactful results.
I'll just add one more thing. I love all these responses. I think one of the things you mentioned that, there's a lot of online courses being used and virtual courses. And I think, obviously with the advent of artificial intelligence and everything, we're all starting to lean on that a lot to develop content and do things like that. And I think it's really important, when we talk about getting ready to learn, I think it's also having your professional folks ready to teach, and not just relying on a virtual course, but instead building a really effective pre-teaching strategy to get people ready to consume that virtual content, and then also having the right follow-up, the right back end of that, the review, to really reinforce those important things that you want people to understand, to actually check for understanding, to follow up and make sure that you have that, to have some measurable way to say, okay, here's Peter, he went through this course, did he really get it? Right? And I think all of those things are also really important, that whole cycle, and it really ties into adult learning principles. People need to know the why, they need to understand the immediate context of what they're learning and how it applies to their job. And so part of the good teaching part that you have to always, I think, be aware of when you start to lean on virtual content is, how do I incorporate that good adult learning principle, behind the course to make it effective?
Love that. Thank you. Those are wonderful, wonderful answers, very detailed. I'm wondering if our next question actually has to do about sort of one-on-one, identifying talent. How do you all as leadership experts identify that aspiring employee that is ready for that next challenge and ready to move on? It sounds like you've got like very wonderful programs in place, but do you have a mechanism for identifying that specific employee? And for this one, I'm wondering actually if Peter, you might continue and help us out with this particular topic.
Sure. I think there's a bunch of phases to it, right? So when people get hired, I think the first thing you have to do is show them that there is a path, a career path for them moving through the organization. So before you even start identifying leadership and all those things, I think those new colleagues that come into your organization, they have to understand what a potential path maybe looks like. So I think that's part of the initial efforts with those new colleagues to get them to buy into the organization and really see themselves in a career in the organization. Then I think the next part is providing a forum for established leaders to share their stories with those new colleagues so that people see, here's how you actually get from where I'm at to where this leader is. What's their story? I think those stories are very compelling. They really help. So as far as identifying aspiring leaders, a lot of times this aspiring leadership, the people that are going to be responsible for making that identification are going to be your first line managers. Well, the first thing that you have to make sure is, do they even know what good leadership looks like? They themselves are often new leaders and are still learning that themselves. So helping them understand the criteria of sort of an emerging leader and looking for those, right? And identifying those and sort of, okay, that person's got it, that person has it. And then coming out of that, what sort of development program do you have? Do you actually have a leadership development program where you identify those high potential people and put them through a program where you start actually, back to our previous question, start upskilling them and actually helping them learn some of those skills and develop that natural, affinity they have for leadership perhaps, and transform that into actual usable skills for being a leader.
Anybody else want to tackle sort of anything you do in your companies to identify talent that might be ready for that next move? Natalie?
We use 9-box talent reviews, and I know there's a lot of different ways and names that 9-box might plot to, but what I find the most beneficial is just the conversation and facilitating that with leaders, whether you start with director and above or start with a specific team, just get started. Teach them how to have that dialogue, and what is learned is so beneficial of how they show up in you as the manager, and what you see might be very different than what your peers are seeing, and so that's good feedback to help them grow. And what I love about the 9 boxes, it's not just always staying there, right? They might be in that box 9 for a period, and that means they're ready for that next stretch opportunity. And so then they might be in a different box for a while as they're learning and growing. But it helps you to make sure you're identifying that talent early and giving them those opportunities.
One of the things I can add, so prior to being with Adeption, I stood up executive development for Target. And one of the things that we really leaned into was experience-based development. So really understanding what experiences have these leaders or individual contributors had, what have been those lessons of experience, and then what are the next experiences they need to have. So even more so than what kind of content do they need to be exposed to, but what kind of role rotations, what type of leader, what type of exposure to other areas of the business is something that we found helpful.
How many of you guys use some kind of a talent review, 9-box, 4-box, 3-box? Well, I think most organizations have some kind of a mechanism to surface high potential talent. I think any mechanism, just about any mechanism, having implemented a lot of these processes for talent management, I've come to appreciate the fact that it's not the boxology that matters, it's not the tool that matters. What matters is exactly, as Natalie was mentioning, it's the conversation and making sure that you're clear about what are the criteria that you're looking for. I always joke that there's no blood test you can draw on and say, you are high potential. There is no such thing. So in order for companies to actually identify talent that's important to invest in, not only because they have high potential or high performers, It's important to invest for the sake of the organization, but quite frankly, folks who are hungry to grow, either you help them grow here or they might go somewhere else to kind of meet that insatiable need. So most organizations that implement some kind of a talent review will have some criteria that will indicate these are the signals that tell us that employees are ready and hungry, or have the wiring to kind of really benefit from accelerated growth. So in a lot of organizations, you'll see a development investment that's very intentional. So we call it development for all, where you could offer resources, culture, and book of the month, or whatever approach that you can take. And then you would have accelerated development for the select targeted few, in the sense that you're feeding specific capabilities and pipelines into the company. And that might be role specific. If your company has a critical role around construction crew leaders or chemists, actuaries, right? So for those specific roles, you might be more intentional, more disciplined around looking at these are the signals we are looking for in order to say we're going to, differentiated development in some of these folks. And those common signals are things like, are they hungry for growth? Hungry as in they're able to outperform their peers in their current role, and they're able to adapt and grow faster than typically would be expected. Are they prone to try to invent new ways of doing things that are working fine? And then there is this innate tenacity to say, but there's a better way, and I learned about a better way somewhere else. Can we try something? Versus, folks who are more inclined to say, it works, don't disrupt this. The world is changing so fast already. So there are a lot of interesting mechanisms that you can use to identify potential talent that is accelerating growth. The one thing I would call out for this conversation is, as much as we're talking about reading talent, it also reflects on the folks who are scoring talent. So bias, when unchecked, would just completely run amok to look at people who are gregarious, people who are charismatic, people who are confident, people who are brave to embrace things and leave everything behind. And so it's really important when you do use a mechanism to go through a calibration process to make sure that multiple angles of leaders will look at the talent and say, are we looking at this talent in a balanced way? Does confidence overcome their lack of competence in the job? And do their charismatic traits overshadow some of their dark side? And are the dark sides manageable in terms of risk factors? So be really mindful around leaders kind of falling in the trap of, I grew up in a, single income family, and look at this, this one has the same hardship that I did, or here's a college athlete, or whatever it is that leaders tend to fall for. Then you kind of end up, spending your precious resources, time, assignments, right, resources on talent that may or may not serve the needs of the organization.
I love that. I love that. How many of you have ever had or run into the dark side employee, right? One or two.
We all have it, right? So,
Very good. Well, we've talked a little bit about reskilling, about upskilling, identifying talent. Roz and I were talking a couple of days ago and came up with this particular thought, which I thought was a really good question. So we're answering it here. What do you do to make learning stick? Not all training and development programs are going to yield obvious business results. And so I'm curious, how do you all as leadership or leadership developers sort of make sure that your programs are effective and effective long term? And if it's okay, Corey, are you okay to jump in on this one?
Absolutely. So this is the age-old question, right? We know that they love to sit in a classroom, whether that be virtual or in person, make connections, but then what do they actually do afterwards? How do we make sure that that learning really does stick? And so I'll share a couple of things here. Number one is really making sure that the content is geared towards helping people solve the problems that are most important to them. And so customizing what it is people are learning, the tools that they're leveraging, we found increases engagement and long-term behavior change. And so we do that typically by asking people to bring a strategic business challenge to the program, and then ladder back all of the content and tools to that strategic business challenge, so they're actually doing something different with it, with their approach. We've also found that a pull strategy, people pulling the content towards them, rather than a push strategy of just pushing a whole bunch of stuff, hoping that some of it lands, has been helpful to us. The other thing that companies are leveraging and have been important to them is really supporting them with an ecosystem of learning. And so continuing support for peer groups, development for the one-up people leader has helped in terms of stickiness. And then the other thing we're doing is asking people what small experiment, what small thing are they going to try differently with their leadership, and then holding them accountable to that. What did you try, and then what's your reflection on what you tried? And then we're able to feed that data back to organizations, and that's been something that's been really powerful. And then I'll just say one other thing, and that is in Target, what was really helpful there, it's really understanding your organization's culture. And what was important there were anecdotal stories. And so storytelling moments where people get to share and are held accountable to, this is what I did differently as a result of the investment the company made in me, and telling those stories to senior leaders.
I'll jump in. A couple things that came to mind, Corey, from your comments. So number one, you talk about making that connection to what's really applicable and the challenges they're facing at work. I think that's really important, that immediacy of connection. But then on the back end of that, there's certainly a tremendous amount of research that shows that if you just teach people something and say, okay, well, this really applies to what you're doing, now go do it, the sort of rate of remembering and being able to apply those things is fairly low. However, if you train and then you follow up with coaching. So you follow up with mentoring and coaching. So you don't just teach something to your folks and say, okay, go out and prosper and do this new thing. If instead that, you actually provide coaching and feedback to make sure that they actually, have learned what you want them to learn or can do what you want them to do, and that you actually give them feedback about that. So that loop is really, really important to make things stick. And talk about stickiness. That is an absolute key. One other thing that came to mind as I was thinking, a lot of times the training that we do internally, right, we do that with our own SMEs. And I think one of the things that's a cautionary tale is to not assume that your SMEs are also good at teaching just because they know things. And so if you're going to have SMEs delivering instruction, you also have to upskill them in the principles of being a good teacher. In order to do that, you can't just say, oh, well, you're an expert in this particular process that we do, go teach people to do that. You actually have to make sure that they are given the skills to be able to actually deliver that in a way that will stick. And then you combine it with coaching, and then you get this great loop.
So people often talk about, do you know adult learning theory? Do you know what are the adult learning principles? The reality is humans learn in human ways. I think when it comes to adults, there are just fundamental differences, call it barriers or call it amplifiers. One is, we're extremely distracted. Humans we just have more, than kids. It could be shopping lists, or it could be, in-laws coming to visit. It could be, any number of things. So we're just extremely distractible beings. And then secondly, what amplifies our learning is we have a vast reservoir of experiences to draw on. So what does it take for you to kind of activate all of the relevant experiences and kind of hook the learning into what folks already know? That's the power of working with adults. Couldn't agree more with everything that you guys have shared in terms of making learning stick. So if I can just take the liberty to summarize a couple of things that we've been talking about here, which is one, make it meaningful, make it relevant, be clear with the why, because adults, they got things to do. So, if you're going on blah, 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 just like I'm doing right this minute, a lot of you are probably thinking about your shopping list. So it's really important for you to get very clear about why it is that we need you to become better at this particular skill. It could be just use a new platform, could be use a new tool, it could be we need you all to lean into uncomfortable conversations, right? It could be, we need all of you to be able to delegate with clarity. It could be any number of things. Let's be really clear about why is it that matters to the group that we're trying to change. And the second thing I would just reiterate, if anybody has second graders, you know this, witness spelling bees, right? So it's practice builds fluency. It's repetition, just the power of repetition. It's practice builds fluency. We're in basketball season. I don't know how many people watch Timberwolves. Does anybody imagine that you could watch a video and become a three-point shooter? Right? We laugh, but we tell leaders, build psychological safety. We tell leaders, navigate across the matrix, and here's your 7-point to-do list, right? Who in the world is gonna go, oh, conflict is arising on my team. Everybody hold while I look up my binder. People don't do that, right? So if we want leaders or if we want employees to do something different, we're gonna have to build fluency. It's gonna take repetition. It's gonna take that comfort with knowing that my first try is not gonna be very pretty, right? So it's this idea about when you build training, why is it so important to build role plays and practice with your leader, practice with your team members, practice with your peers. It's that important. The third principle really comes down to the fact that we're social creatures. So if you want learning to occur, if you want learning to actually take hold, you can't have the entire ecosystem work against it. So I love your point about building peer coaching groups, peer learning groups. Your point about go practice with your upline leader. You engage your upline leader to practice the same skills. In our leadership program, we often use next level leaders as coaches inside our training experiences so that they too become inadvertently part of the practice culture. And then the last thing, I would just reiterate the power of storytelling. Learning has to be emotional, and emotion is a powerful amplifier for having new information, new skills stick. So, many of us would recognize kids remember things better than we do sometimes. And for kids, every new thing is kind of a light bulb moment. And everything that's new and is exciting, and what would it take for all of us to bring it to an emotional level of connection? So a simple example, I have a team member here, in many of our training programs, we actually use our own leaders to tell their own stories, whether they're coaching their 5-year-old soccer team or whether they're dealing with a particularly gnarly business challenge. When leaders are able to convey that sense of confusion, friction, frustration, and celebration, and that all of that becomes that much more real to everyone involved in the production of it and in the watching of it. So couldn't agree more with all the good practices you guys shared.
I love this. In the name of our next topic, I'm wondering if you, the audience, would engage me in a little quick experiment. Could I get this side of the room to nod if you're okay? All right. You've heard of the wave that's done in games. I want to start on this side of the room, big wave, and go all the way from this side of the room to that side of the room. We're just going to take a minute on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Start.
Oh, look at this. This is
Woohoo!
awesome.
All right, give yourselves a round of applause. I love it. Because the next thing we're going to talk about is creativity and fun. Mm-hmm. What you all do is so critical to your employers, and to your corporations. But I have a question. These things are so serious. Some in our audience might relate to a tale. You might know somebody who's gone through this, where the idea of continuous learning is so intense and so important that you have this checklist, you go through the 9 box, you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and your whole process becomes maybe a little formulaic, you know, maybe a little routine. And I'm wondering, how do you, our panelists, maybe shake things up a little bit, make it fun and engaging and exciting for your corporation and for the workers who are going through this. So thank you for giving us a little fun today, and let's redirect our questions here to a little bit of fun and creativity. What do you do to make learning fun within your corporations? Oh, and I'll start it off. Natalie, I'm so sorry, I'm supposed to pick somebody. Natalie, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think the topic of practice we were just going through, I think you can make practicing your new learning fun. Something we like to do, is, for example, is with new managers when there's sessions on role playing, bringing in leaders to do that role playing and interacting, right? A difficult employee, managing conflict. People remember that and they have a little bit of fun with it, and they get to connect with their leaders in a very real moment and maybe hear some of those stories as well, and naturally. Other things are just little, like a contest, right? So compliance training is something we have to do every year, but we try to mix it up with like, okay, the first 100 people to take it, you get swag, or the first team, you get lunch, whatever it may be, just to mix it up a bit more. I think the other piece, which we've kind of touched on, is community, creating a sense of connection and community. So whether that's through the mentorships or the peer learning, through the leadership cohorts. What I really love is our leadership cohort brings employees together from across functions, across countries, to really make a network besides your team that you're always working with on the same conflicts. And maybe it's a new challenge with a team member and you want to talk to someone who's not within your team about how to address that. Or maybe it's something as you're learning the organization and how to navigate internal politics. You're able to connect with someone outside your day-to-day, and the learning opportunities bridge that.
I really like that. One of the things that we really leverage and that I've seen work well in my career is just, as you did, Roz, the value of experiential learning. And so whether it be Spaghetti Tower or Visual Explorer or any kind of activity to get people, honestly, to be perfectly always themselves. We can't help ourselves. We go into those activities thinking, I am going to be on my best behavior. I'm going to show up so well. I'm going to listen to everybody's ideas. And 10 seconds in, we are perfectly always ourselves. And so those kinds of experiential activities, now that we're in this remote and hybrid world, I'm on the lookout for experiential activities that work really well virtually. And so if you have ideas, I'm looking to tap into your wisdom. So if you see me later in the day and you have a recommendation, I'm all ears.
I'll say one of the things that we've done that's gotten a really good response is one of the teams that I manage is they produce video content actually for our clients, but they're really, really creative folks. And so since we're always having new training initiatives rolling out, we take from the previous training initiative people that were kind of the first people that got all the training done, or the people that were the most engaged, and we actually have them star in a funny video to introduce the next training initiative. And they do all this great animation and have all this fun with it. So we always try to pull people in. So people want to be in those videos because our video team, they're super creative. They're great at writing these really funny scripts. And it's just this thing we all look forward to, like, ooh, when's the next video coming out, And everybody loves it. And so it builds excitement around those initiatives. And, in the middle of all the fun in the video is, let's talk about, why this next initiative is important to our organization. Another thing that we do kind of attached to that, and we introduce these actually in the videos too, is we do, since there's a lot of technical things that my organization does, so there's a lot of little technical trainings coming out all the time. It's this constant flow, right? So it's ever present. And so we attach those chunks of training into badges. And then people can earn badges for doing that, and we make like custom backgrounds for, everyone's living in Teams meetings and things, right? So you have these custom backgrounds that show the badges that you've earned, and we publish these lists of people that have earned the badges in our internal newspaper, if you will. And so we just try to create a lot of enthusiasm around people completing and being part of that. And so people like to jump into team meetings and you'll see their background, our Sedgwick background, but they've got, this badge and this badge and this badge on the background from the latest initiative. So between that and the video, I think we're able to add a lot of fun to what we're doing.
I love that. That is such a cool idea right there.
I think
in terms of, digital fun. So ditto on the same ask. How do we kind of create that sense of engagement and energizing moments in a digital and hybrid format? So if you have ideas for Corey, don't be stingy, pass it around. So a couple of things I would just offer. One, get physical. We do a lot of thinking and learning and, so what I find is super energizing is to get physical, do the wave and get people up on their feet and moving. I think it's just a really good energizing experience. And not to mention the fact that, we know sitting is the new smoking. So get people on their feet, get physical, get tactile on the equipment and, get folks moving. I find that to be almost always a winning idea. And the second thing I would say is, folks are really practical around solve my real work problems. So some of my most successful learning solutions is not about lecturing at folks with stories and videos and fun, but rather we say, bring your challenges and bring your real work so that they feel like this is something I can wrestle with and I can go implement that on Monday, right? So Betsy was part of one of our earlier initiatives around kind of how do we upskill our leaders on giving performance feedback. And rather than teaching you all the principles, all the best practices, we actually just curated 30 headache issues and allow people to kind of pick it out of the basket and say, what would I do with this, right? So we end up with leaders refusing to leave because they got more of these that they want to talk through and practice. So it's very relevant, it's very real. So it's about bringing your real work to learning and making learning part of the real work so that it's mutually reinforcing. The third thing I would just offer is this whole idea around we're in this together, building that sense of collective ownership. So we often bring, as I mentioned, we bring leaders into our learning sessions. So everybody wrestling with the same issues because what that does is that gives people an opportunity to kind of draw upon that shared experience the next time they interact with that leader, the next time they have an opportunity to reach out with virtual channels. Because, we've lost the proverbial water cooler in a hybrid world. So how do you create these mechanisms for people to connect on an informal basis? I find that to actually become a super valuable experience. And, I think about other examples, in the interest of building fluency, I forget if I have a team member from my previous company, where we ask leaders to just get used to day-to-day feedback. So we literally line people up face-to-face, like a speed dating line. So we have 60-second bell, and you offer each other feedback. And then you move to the next one, and you rotate and you rotate. So, in a 15-minute cycle, you've gone through lots of repetition, and to the point of feeling kind of silly, but it's gonna be there when you need it, right? So, so how do you just kind of create that sense of energy and fun and relevance so that the learning is meaningful, not just for a break or a chore or whatever. Competition, we've always done competitions on physical skills. A lot of gaming and simulation, to your point. We've hired firms that set up, Desert Survival or League of Nations, where there's profound meaning behind how we all behave when we're suddenly competing against each other, and then you get to dissect what behaviors are helpful or not helpful. And ironically, people kind of draw the learning more personally when they realize that is me. The last thing I would just offer, among folks who really care about this, that don't lose the learning for the fun. Don't lose the learning for the fun, because a lot of times, we have professionals set up fun for the sake of having fun, and you get people to talk about, what's your dream vacation, or what's your dream destination, or whatever, and pretty soon the whole group is thinking about going to Africa safari, and you're kind of completely losing the focus on what it is you're trying to work on. So it's really important that when you use elements of fun, you have a specific objective in mind.
I love it. Our last question, and we only have about a minute here, but I'm wondering, in the interest of fun, maybe the last question, we should focus a little bit more and have you elaborate on some of those one-on-ones, the quick 60-second introductions, or I'm wondering about human interactions, one-on-ones, warm and fuzzy times, or one-on-one coaching. And I'm curious, sort of, what are your best humanizing learning tools that you might have embraced over the years? And in the interest of time, this is going to be your speed dating. So run with it. Let's start with Corey. We'll just go on down the line. What's your best human connection thing as a learning tool?
My best human connection tip is really taking time to ask people how they're doing and really mean it. It's so easy just to jump into the business and what do we need to get done in this meeting, but actually saying, how was your weekend? I know you coached your kids' soccer, so taking time to actually build that relationship. That's my tip.
I would say listen more than you speak. That always serves me well, so a good reminder.
I would say show vulnerability as a leader and build a culture where being a vulnerable leader is okay.
Hugs.
I love it. Well, I'm going to ask you all, not maybe hug them after, but can we get a really nice round of applause for our panelists today? I think they've done a really nice job. So I want to thank Corey from Adeption. I want to thank Natalie from Epicor. Peter, you've been phenomenal, and Roz from Thrivent. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.